Hey everyone, we're continuing our full set review for Revelations, and we've made our way to Descendants of the Dragon. A reminder, we're giving these cards spice ratings 1 through 5, and that is letting you know how excited I am to build a deck around the card or include the card in a deck. Doesn't necessarily say that the card is powerful or not, and it's completely subjective. So if you feel very differently about one of the cards than I do, I'd like to hear why in the comments. And with that, we're just going to jump right into the commons. And the first one is Aura of Arrows. And this one, I think this is just a 2 spice for me. And the reason is, so the card lets you buff a character, gives it reach until end of turn, and it's got recall for 3. So you can make a character bigger and potentially deal with some flyers, but the card isn't very exciting in the sense that I don't think there's an obvious deck that wants to leverage this. And as far as dealing with flyers goes, we already have Lance of Jinhai. So I think this card might be a card that is like one of those potatoes cards that I've been talking about, where it is not bringing a whole lot of flashiness to a deck. Could potentially be a card that you want to use in your deck, but for me, I'm just not particularly excited about it. Moving on to the next one. Harvest Offerings. And this is going to be a 4 spice for me. I've already talked about this card, but basically it lets you play a morale burn deck that doesn't have to rely on the same level of planning and setup that a card like Lingbao's will. will. Funny, but anyways, that was grammatically correct, so we'll pretend like it didn't happen. It's 1 purity, which is interesting because it might allow you to expand your morale burn strategy outside of the most dedicated Descendants of the Dragon kind of decks. And overall, I think it offers a really interesting place in the game. Looking forward to seeing how people use this card. Next, we have Lake Shrine Ranger. This is one we haven't covered. Going to get this out of the way. I think this is going to be a 3 spice for me. The card is 2 cost, reach, vigilance. It's a 5/5. So right off the bat, pretty solid. And at the beginning of combat, if your max resources are 10 or more, it's going to transform into a 10/10 Spirit with Flying. And I should add here that the image that I have says card name on it instead of the actual Lake Shrine Ranger name. When the card gets implemented in the game, it's obviously going to have the correct name listed there, but we're working with what we've got. And I think this card doesn't have an obvious deck that it goes into, but I really find the effect of it transforming at 10 resources to be very compelling. So much so that I would honestly like to see that clause written on other cards just to see how that plays out. It'll be interesting to see this card in the game, and maybe it'll set a precedent for a return of this game mechanic, which I think is a pretty cool mechanic, and it's overall, I think, a positive mechanic for the game in terms of smoothing out gameplay. So, big fan of the card, just not one that I'm excited to play with. So I'm a big fan of it from like a design standpoint, but I'm not gonna like rush to put it in a deck, if that makes sense. Okay, next we have Vessel of Harmony, and this is a 1 cost 0/8, which is a very interesting stat line for the cost of 1. We don't have any character with this stat line yet, so that alone is pretty interesting. I think this is going to be a 3 spice for me. The card creates a balance in your hand when it's deployed. So it does have a cool deck that you can really build around this, that you can really lean into making the card balance the core component of your deck, because between putting balance itself in your deck and putting Vessel of Harmony in your deck, you can very, very reliably have the card balance available at all times for you to use. But I am not excited to build that deck myself. I'm more excited to see other players build that deck. So that's why we're giving it the medium 3 spice. Okay, now we have an uncommon, Xia Xia Han Captain, and it is a 5-cost 10/10 with Barrier 1. And at the start of combat, if Xia Han Captain is deployed and you control exactly one character in the assault zone, that character gets +1/+1 for each character in your defense zone until the end of the turn. Very unique, interesting effect. This is a 4 spice for me. There's a lot of really weird, cool things you can do with the card in terms of making a character of your choice kind of your champion, and this card is supporting that champion and buffing it. It's almost like an Iberian's banner, but for Descendants of the Dragon. It's also 1 purity, so if you want, you can use both. You can do double Flame Dawn and Descendants of the Dragon together and double dip on that effect. This guy's also cool because he has the impact. His effect begins the turn he's played, even though he's going to be in the support zone. So that's really neat. It also works really well with Avatar of Lingbao, and I think it works with Shunhao's Urn. I believe somebody may have mentioned that, and that seems significant as well. Overall, the card, even if you're not building a deck around it, seems pretty solid. So that's a 4 spice because there's just so many different directions you can go with this, and I'm curious to see what people do. Okay. Next, we're moving into our 2 rares, and the first one is Blunt the Assault. This card is a 5 spice for me. It gives all characters, yours and your opponents, -4, -0, then kills all enemy characters with attack 0 or less. So the debuff applies to everybody, but the kill effect is asymmetrical. So this card is, I mean, I know we're not, this is not about how powerful the card is, but it's hard not to mention here that I think this card's quite powerful. I could be proved dead wrong on that, but my gut reaction says I want to play with this card because I think that there are a lot of situations where this card is pretty crazy. It's worth noting that the card also doesn't care about what zone the characters are in. So this hits the support zone. This hits the command zone. Very, very interesting new tool for Descendants of the Dragons. And the fact that it is somewhat asymmetrical allows you to be very proactive when you play this card because you can get aggressive and expect to come out on top during the turn that you play the card. So yeah, 5 spice. This one's really exciting for me. And our final card, we've already talked about him before, Crestmoor. And this for me is a 3 spice. And to be clear, I think that the card does have a really interesting role in terms of you can build a deck really specifically around Crestmoor, and that he can be your hero, he can be your champion, he can be your guy. As a matter of fact, Xia Han Captain that we mentioned before probably plays pretty well with Crestmoor. But the reason that he's a 3 spice and not higher for me is just because this isn't my playstyle. I'm really curious to see how other people do with this deck, but it's not the one that I'm going to rush to build first. And that wraps up our Descendants of the Dragon cards. And in the next video, you're going to see my thoughts on the Exiles cards. See you then.